Coming up on Regarding Men, Biden White House denies men and boys. Warren Farrell responds. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Regarding Men, a place where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die. Anyway, as you can see, I'm here with my two usual compatriots, Paul Elam and Janice Fiamengo, both highly intelligent men's advocates. Indeed they are, especially Janice. And we're joined today by Warren Farrell, who really needs no daggone introduction. Warren has done more for us than I can even start to tell you. Warren is actually the father and grandfather of so many of our ideas about men's issues today. When I read that Myth of Male Power book, it was like, oh my gosh. It was just amazing. Well, Warren has been doing all kinds of things over the years, but one of the things he's been doing for the last 8 years, 10 years, Warren, is to have a group together to try and push the idea of a White House Council for Boys and Men. And we went through the Obama era, we went through the Trump era, and now we're in the Biden era. And we won't bore you with all the details of what happened before. But now what's happening is, by George, Biden is actually starting a Gender Equality Council. Sounds good, right? It sounds good until you realize, Joe, it's only for girls and women. Would we have predicted that? Probably so. So Warren was on a number of media outlets. He's written a number of things, and one of the things he did was on Fox. We're going to play a little clip of that before we start. So let's play that clip right now.
While the politically correct gender police may be cheering President Biden as having the most inclusive administration in history, others are slamming the president's new gender policy, calling it sexist. How could that be? By benefiting only women and girls and overlooking the very real struggles faced by America's boys. Joining me now is Dr. Warren Farrell. He's the co-author of The Boys Crisis, Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is such an important topic. Tell me what you see is wrong with the current policy at the Biden administration.
Well, it's really pretty amazing because President Biden says he's inclusive and he's in favor of healing and unity and being in very favor of diversity, and yet he's formed a gender policy council that completely leaves out boys, leaves out fathers, leaves out men. And he says it's also about racial injustice. And yet the black males are completely left out. He talks about LGBTQ being so important, and he's left out trans males and every part of LGBTQ if you are a male. So it's the most sexist and racist policy that can be established. And that's one thing if you are just establishing sexist policies, but if you're claiming to be in favor of unity and healing, that's not a good combination.
Yeah, I first started to see...
Indeed, it's not a good combination, Warren. Very well said. Very well said. And Warren, let's hear from the horse's mouth. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, I think it's, on one hand, it's not amazing because here Biden was the leader of the Violence Against Women Act and, expanded the amount of money that it had. At one point, it had almost as much money as any other non-defense policy that we had. And so this is really, this is at one level not surprising. Right. So if it isn't surprising that he would take feminist perspectives and be pioneering for women still, or not pioneering, but perhaps the opposite of that at this point, then all right, form a White House Council on Women and Girls and just be explicit about it. But to form a White House Gender Policy Council that is, that only includes one gender, and is just amazing. And then to say that you are in favor, one of your main missions is to confront racial inequality and to not include black males who are the ones in prison, who are the ones, if you go into any city at night and you look at somebody who's street homeless, that you are very likely to find if the person is black, it is about 90% likely to be a black male. If you go into, that I ran for governor in California and I spoke to a bunch of prison populations, and those prison populations have gone up 700% since the 1970s, and 93% of them are male. And among those males, the great majority of them are black, even though only 12% of the American population is black. And so we have this disproportionate number of prisoners who are black. And when I talk to these prisoners, they almost all, I would ask them right at the very beginning, how many of you had a significant amount of father involvement as you were growing up? And about 4 or 5% raised their hand.
Wow.
And about when I say the opposite of that, about 96% raised their hand.
Wow.
And then when I talk to them about here are the 50 different ways that children tend on average to develop better when they have father involvement. And here is why dad style parenting is so important. I don't think I've ever been more touched in my life than when I had these prisoners tattooed all over the place, muscles that made mine look like a flab, coming up to me and crying, saying, I always thought that I deserved to be in prison, that I was hopeless, that I was my family's shame. And now I see for the first time in my life that I can prevent my children from making the mistakes that I made and ending up here. That the types of things that my wife and I got into arguments about, things like roughhousing, things like teasing, that she just said I was bullying, and things like helping them take risks that they otherwise my wife was afraid of my taking. That I had something that you're telling me here, that those are actually positive contributions, or they can be positive contributions. And I feel like now I have something to live for. And so for Biden to establish a council that when the single biggest problem that black males have is lack of father involvement, to then exclude males and then exclude father involvement, and exclude boys, the problems that the people these boys were males were before they went into prison, is to be so hypocritical and so racist. This is just, this is astonishing to me. And so then, I was formally, I had been in touch with Jen Klein. Jen Klein is one of the two co-chairs of the Gender Policy Council. And she and I had been in extensive contact during the Hillary Clinton campaign, when I said, it's really, if you want Hillary Clinton to expand her base, have her talk about the issues of boys and men, aside from the justice of that. And she always assured me that she was doing exactly that. So I said, oh, wonderful. I want to be able to tell my coalition members on the Coalition to Create a White House Council on Boys and Men that this is being done. She wouldn't send me, couldn't send me, didn't send me a single thing on that. So finally she said, here's a link. She's speaking to a boys school. And so I clicked on, listened to it, and there was not a single thing at the boys school about the challenges that boys had. It was only feminist perspectives on the challenges boys had. And she couldn't even see that speaking to a boys school did not mean that you understood boys' issues. And so it was, and here would have been a perfect example for Hillary Clinton to do just that, even if she hoped it wouldn't get out beyond the boys' school. And so it's sort of like, and so this time dealing with Jen Klein has been, the same type of response. Now, remember, Jen Klein is the co-chair of the Gender Policy Council. There are two co-chairs, but Jen Klein is the only one that is full-time. The other co-chair is also the chief of staff for the vice president. And so we have only one full-time chair of the Gender Policy Council, and her response is exactly the same. And what I mean by that is, President Biden cares deeply for boys and men. Well, that's great,
Right.
Jen. So then include him to create policies. He's already advocating policies for boys and men. Please tell me what they are, Jen. No response. She couldn't tell me one policy that manifested his caring about boys and men. Now, personally, do I think he cares about boys? He's had sons. He's brought them up. He's been one of the most, he's made trips almost every night from Washington to his home to be with his kids. Of all people, he should understand this. But this is the power of what's happening now to Democrats. When I went out to Iowa, I had the same experience. I talked to Andrew Yang, talked to John Hickenlooper. They both, and 9 other candidates, many of them, not all of them, really got boys and men's issues once I shared what the issues were. Andrew Yang knew about it before I got to him.
Yes.
But his campaign managers, both of their campaign managers, especially Andrew Yang's, who saw that I'd really gotten through to him and he and I bonded. The campaign manager came up to me and said, Warren, I can't advocate for Andrew Yang to speak up about this because we're going to alienate our feminist base and we're going to alienate mothers who will hear from what you're saying that father involvement implies that they're not enough. And so we can't afford to do that. Now, I can understand that perspective during the campaign to become the Democratic nominee. I don't think it's good politics because I think that the one person in 25 candidates who would speak up about that would connect with the Democratic primary voters, enough of them to actually give him or her an advantage. But aside from that, I can see the limited thinking on the part of the campaign managers' politics. But once the person becomes presidential candidate for that party, for them to not realize that for millions, and I mean about 20 million parents who are facing challenges with their sons, their dedication and their love for their sons exceeds their love for their party label. And so even if you look at it just from a greedy political perspective, for Democrats not to realize that Democrats are hoisting Democrats by their own petard is a real, is really pretty amazing.
Yeah. Gotta agree. It's crazy, crazy. And Warren, your thing about going out and seeing the prisoners just reminded me of the kinds of things we could do if we had a White House counsel. I mean, you could make YouTubes, you could make videos that would be distributed out, talking about the powers of fatherhood. I mean, to not just the black men in prison, but to all men who don't know how powerful fatherhood is and their importance. And yes, I think they've been shamed by women saying, oh, no, you shouldn't treat children like that, because she wouldn't treat them like that.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And
boy.
this is where Janice, you come in as being so important. The role I served in the early feminist movement was to be, when feminists were being said that that they were all man haters, which turns out to be more true than I thought.
Indeed.
I was put up there to sort of make sure that that if I was advocating, therefore that and feminists were advocating me, that therefore feminists weren't man haters. And now we have the opposite of the case, and of course the strongest segment of the population that is stuck to this in advocacy mode is gender women's studies courses or supposed gender studies courses. And you are just a perfect person to be able to talk about to begin to penetrate the gender studies courses and say, hey, wait a minute, there's many of us here who have sons who realize that the world is more complex than women good, men bad, women oppressors, men oppressors, women the oppressed. That it's not just a patriarchal world, not a world dominated by a patriarchy, but it was a world dominated by the need to survive. You can get more. You can gather together those people who are afraid to speak up in their universities for fear that they'll be knocked out, especially if they don't have tenure.
Yeah.
Well, it's quite a challenge. Certainly, it is far more possible for women to speak up about these issues, but even for female academics attempting to deviate from the standard narrative, it can be a pretty frightening thing in the vicious world of academic politics. And for male academics, it is indeed very perilous. But it has to be done. Someone has to start.
And I certainly
I have. Oh, go ahead, Warren.
No, you go ahead.
Well, again, that begs the question, how to approach this. For instance, I'm sure that Joe Biden has some awareness of, having boys. He has sons. He took his son on a very nice trip to China once.
Many times, actually.
There was definitely a connection there. But isn't the fundamental problem that advocating for men or boys is suicide politically?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is why, again, I would love to see some action in government to recognize the issues of men and boys. I don't ever see it happening, personally. I just don't understand in what world we're going to have people speak up politically about what is impacting boys and men, and subsequently, even if we're accurately drawing a picture of a culture that is so damaged by the issue of father absence and what it does to our prison populations, to our crime rates, to drug use, to teen pregnancy, to every psychosocial measure that we have for the well-being of young people is negatively impacted by father absence. But the moment we identify this as a problem for boys or men, the whole world loses their fucking mind about it and absolutely wants to hear nothing. And just like Andrew Yang's campaigner told you, and it's not just the feminist space, it's women. Women are going to reject it. The moment you start talking about men and boys, women are like, no. And yes, you can frame it in terms of mothers and their sons. And I think that does make some inroads with some women. But we still have this overarching taboo socially about this that is prohibitive across the board. And one, I wonder what, if anything, can be done about it. And two, I'm just curious, Warren, how you handle all the obtuseness that you come up against over and over again with trying to get this done.
Yes. Well, first of all, I really want to agree with you. I mean, I remember the first time I brought this type of issue up at the Board of Now in New York City in the early 70s, when there was an increase in divorces in the early 70s. And I saw the original research plus the Moynihan report that said, that the problems that were occurring in the inner cities were occurring not in the Black community per se, but in that portion of the Black community, that 25% portion of the Black community, in which boys were growing up without dads, and that was where the crime was emanating from. And so now, of course, that's 50%, more than 50% of the Black community is in that mode. And at the time, it was only 3.2% of the Caucasian community that was in fatherless mode. It's now 35% of the Caucasian community that's in fatherless.
Is that right? 35.
Minimal father involvement. So that's about 12, 13, therefore 1,300% increase in the amount of fatherlessness in the Caucasian community. So and so I brought this issue up to the Board of Now. And, in the past, they'd always been really, yay, Warren, you're so great, blah, blah, blah. And it was like silence. And then they started cross-examining me. And they said, and one of the people said, Warren, we have a problem, which is our now members are making it crystal clear that when they get a divorce, they don't want us talking about equality after divorce. They want us to sort of make sure that we understand, that we now understand that mothers know best what's for the best for the child.
Oh
And
God.
if she wants to have a mistake that she made in the past, that is marrying the dad of those children and moving out of state, she should have that opportunity because she knows what's best. And
Wow.
I made the mistake of saying this is, the same as the male chauvinists were saying when they were talking about, men who are doctors have had a long history of being doctors. They know what's best, so they should decide which female doctors should or shouldn't be allowed. And most of them feel that, and that, when women's style is different from men's style, male doctors know best, or male lawyers know best, or male executives know best. You wouldn't applaud that for the beginning. And then I got the feedback, wait a minute, are you for us or against us? And then it emanated from that, that your living is dependent upon our recommending you to, all around the world. And that was true. And fortunately, I began to start saving much more at that point because they made it clear to me that if I were, so that the agreement at that point was, well, Warren, you've said yourself that we don't have a lot of good longitudinal data on this that is really scientifically rigorous. So why don't you go ahead and do more research and wait a few more years and see what happens to these people as these kids grow up. And so I agreed, but I knew right then and there that the handwriting was on the wall.
Yeah.
And it is true that, I once sat down and calculated about how much I had lost, and from making the decision to be honest with the research on boys and men and fathers rather. And it's, somewhere in the category of $12 million. And a huge amount of sacrifice. This is all to Paul Elam's point that it is a type of suicide.
Yes.
I was told I was on the finalist list for the McCarthy grant, Genius Grant Award, and then another Ford Foundation Award that I had never applied for, either one. And I was, it got around that this was my new take, and dropped immediately from those lists.
Wow.
And so on like that. But it's so I could not agree more that there is a price to pay. And that's what, Janice is up against. That's what we're all up against in
Yes.
trying to make that happen.
Yeah.
But the irony of it all is that the money that I made during those years, I did invest reasonably wisely, and they have supported me to do this type of contribution
Jolly good.
the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah, I'll never forget back in the, I guess, 10, 12 years ago when they were starting the Maryland Commission for Men's Health. The politician who started it, who got it started, was a wildly successful and popular black male, huge guy, wonderful guy from Tacoma Park, Maryland. And he put the whole thing through and got this going, the Maryland Commission for Men's Health. The next election, he was out.
Wow.
He was gone.
I did not realize that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. So
so
it just speaks to what you and Paul are both saying. This is what happens. If you do anything for boys and men, you're in trouble.
yes.
You're in trouble.
Warren, I'm wondering if you have any insights, perhaps, or even speculation into why organizations like the Ford Foundation, what is motivating them to take such a narrow view of sexual politics of men and women in what they're funding? Because we know that they've been a huge backer of feminism from the get-go.
Absolutely.
Do you have any idea what is driving them in that direction?
I think I do, and there's two levels of motivation. One is when the feminist movement emanated, in the late '60s, the most recent version of it, we had grown out of the civil rights movement, in which there was an oppressor and an oppressed. We had grown. Many of the leading feminists were quite Marxist in their orientation, and read books on Lenin and so on, which said the nuclear family was part of the patriarchy, designed to benefit men at the expense of women. And so we developed it, and we saw that men earned more money than women did. And so that made it seem like men were in that oppressor class and women were the oppressed. So we had a hierarchical type of value system of oppressor oppressed that we then took and put on men. And so men, It
Right.
was not true that men were earning more per se. They were earning a little bit more, but it was really fathers that were earning more than mothers.
Huh.
And so instead of saying that fathers earn more than mothers, that is a thank you, dads, for making the sacrifice of earning more, because we understand that the road to high pay is a toll road, and that you give up jobs that you would love to do that pay less, like being an elementary school teacher or being an artist or a writer or an actor or a musician. Those are all jobs that you can't afford to do if you're supporting a wife, children, and you want to move them into a better neighborhood with better schools. So most men, 99% of men who have aspirations in that direction, give up doing what they want to do in exchange for doing what they feel they have to do that earns more money, that is less fulfilling. And the reason those jobs pay less, that are more fulfilling, is because the supply is great of people wanting to do jobs like being actors and writers. But in exchange for that supply, the demand is not so great in relation to the supply. And so therefore we can pay elementary school teachers, actors, writers, and so on a small amount until they start earning their money by being the 1/2 of 1% that are extremely successful. And so we in the feminist movement never said thank you, men, for making sacrifices of what you want to do, and not even complaining about it. And we thank women for making sacrifices of careers, but we never thanked men for making sacrifices in careers. Now that's the social fabric of what type of the type of attitude and mentality that we approach this issue with. What is deeper, though, and more depressing is the biological dimension of it. Whether we go from tiny animals to human beings, about 85% of reproduction happens between the female who is ready to become pregnant and her choice of the alpha male. And so the woman is only interested, the female is interested in that alpha male for healthy reasons. She wants to have her children have the best genes possible. So we males compete to be that alpha male, so that Lois Lane, who would pass over Clark Kent, will choose us once she sees that we're Superman. And we see this in almost all animals. So for example, in buck elks, the female buck elk will almost always choose the male buck elk who has the biggest antlers. But to achieve those biggest antlers, the buck elk has to exhaust 30%, excuse me, of its calcium, its nutrients, and its minerals. And so therefore, immediately after reproduction, if it does not get rid of that rack that made it the alpha male, it will be likely to die before, if winter sets in, before the buck elk can replenish its nutrients and minerals. And that to me is a perfect metaphor for men's weakness being our facade of strength, combined with the fact that females, we work hard to become weak even as we appear strong, so that we will be loved. And that is biologically so steep that we have to confront the fact that we also have a different biology operating, which is the RCZ, the rostral cingulate zone, other parts of our approval system that can respond positively to creating an evolutionary shift. But we have to understand that we evolutionarily got to this level by reproductions that were in this mode, but that the future strength of men does not rest on having an appearance of strength and denying our underlying weakness, that is, and yet also preserving the parts of masculinity that are truly needed for the future, that are being sacrificed in a feminized modality at the present time. So it's two dimensions. It's the social dimension and it's the biological dimension, and understanding that both of these are interacting with each other. Life is not about biology and it's not about socialization. It's about the interaction between the two. Our brains are very flexibly designed to respond, biologically differently when there's a different social need. Now, fortunately, on this issue, people like Janice, who are in the universities, that type of argument that I just talked about, that's a complex argument. That goes, and the deeper that you dig, the more accuracy you find about that, and that is very conducive to the academic community if we can penetrate people's, if we can begin to get enough people to say we need to be introducing this alternative way of thinking into gender studies. And so that's a huge job. And it's why I haven't been so discouraged, because I've never expected the male part to be able to change as quickly as the female part. When women complain, men compete to save. When men complain, women hear a sort of fingernails scratching on their chalkboard, and women do not fall in love with men who complain. They think of them as whiners, and women fall in love with alpha males, not whining males.
Yeah, it's a matter of pathogen disgust in the species, isn't it? When we see men as either vulnerable or weak or not measuring up to the alpha status, the reaction most prominently, well, I guess it happens in both sexes with women and men, is rejection.
Absolutely.
And so it seems like we're wired as a species to undermine any efforts to help men from the very beginning.
Right. We do. Tom,
you're muted.
Tom, you're muted.
Thank you. I muted it a while back because Barney was having a dream. He was barking like crazy. Oh, well. But I was going to say, the moment you mention biology at a university, you're finished. If you try and connect gender with biology, you're out.
Yeah.
They won't listen to that crap.
Yeah.
Well,
Crazy.
They start to become easier with the trans discussion, in which feminists are now beginning to take a little bit more complex a stance about the impact of
it's because they have to.
Yes, it's true. Mm-hmm. I read an article yesterday in Scientific American where they're talking about trans people, and they're saying there is no male brain, there is no female brain, but there is a trans brain. I went, oh my God.
The trans is from what to what?
They're thinking like this article thinks. The Biden administration will attempt to correct 10,000 years of sexism with a gender equality council.
Yes.
That's what we're up against.
Way of advertising in the feminist mode that any efforts to correct sexism are doomed to failure. We will always have a sexist society. Thus, we always have the need for feminism. That's what that headline screams at me.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That's a good point. That's a good point.
I think the headline should just change really one word, the word attempt, to reinforce. We'll reinforce 10,000 years of sexism with more sexism.
Yeah.
Exactly. More sexism. Pour it on my cereal.
Pour it on the cereal.
Warren, what is it? I mean, we know that you've been working diligently on this, the proposed White House Council for Boys and Men, for, as Tom said, for a decade now. Now it seems, though, that we're still split between, we've got people on the left who view everything male as evil and any attempt to help men as evil. And then we have people on the right, mainly people who are lamenting the fact that men are no longer on their white horses ready to die as readily as they should for women. So we're killed on one side by anti-male sexism, on the other side by chivalry, which is another form of anti-male sexism. Where do you see the future of this going? Is there an inroad to making this happen, or are you doing this just for the fight itself? Which I respect tremendously.
Yeah. No, you know enough about my personality that I'm really much more of a diplomat than a fighter. So fighting like this is not my desire. But also when I see something so out of whack and so, I've thought about writing a book called Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and it would describe exactly what you are talking about. That said, though, even though I'm a lifelong Democrat, I was invited to the White House to brief them on the boy crisis book, and sort of like I scare liberals when I talk about what I'm talking about. So the Republican Party, the Republicans are at least much more receptive to three things actually: boys' issues and the willingness to see that boys do have issues and problems that need to be dealt with. They're much more receptive to father involvement. They get father involvement immediately because they get the importance of the intact family immediately, and they see and they get the importance finally of the family as a whole immediately. And so when it comes to and they see and they understand male's sacrifice. I mean, when I was briefing at the White House, I was sharing the story of a man I met in Santa Cruz who was a cab driver, and he was telling me that he'd spent he wanted his daughter to be the first one to go to college in their family, that their family had nobody had even graduated from high school. And so he worked, drove 70 hours a week, sometimes even more than that, to save up the money to send his daughter to college. And she went to UCSC, which is University of California, Santa Cruz. And within one semester, she came back explaining to her dad why he was the oppressor.
Yes.
Yeah. All about his privilege.
And she knew she was right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That is obscene. I mean,
Sure it is. But
It's
undoubtedly, he will continue to write tuition checks to this school. So I feel for him as a father. I think it's horrible that he gets subjected to this, but he's paying for it willingly, and he'll continue to. If he's like most men, he will continue to pay for it with his mouth closed, and just hope it gets better one day.
Yes,
and then by the time she graduates, she may hate his guts as a human being, which is happening a lot these days. But we're not holding men to account for enabling this stuff either. We want to blame the school, and I think that there's certainly blame to be laid on the education system. But the enabling that's coming out of fathers is just astonishing to me.
Yeah.
I have three comments on that, Paul. Yes, yes, and yes. It's absolutely, the reason I wrote the book, Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, and then started to, in the boy crisis book, I started to say, okay, men, what is it that women aren't hearing that you don't say? Here are 9 different styles of dad style parenting. Here is what the connection between your style of parenting is and children becoming more empathetic, children knowing the difference between being assertive versus aggressive. When we opened up our group here before we got on air, Tom immediately sort of like teased Paul, but not Janice. I would tease Paul. Paul teases me. I tease Tom. Tom teases me, because we've learned that the part of the pathway to successful men is the commerce of masculinity, is the trading of wit-covered put-downs, because anybody that can't handle a wit-covered put-down is not being set up to be successful. But we protect women from it because we don't want to be called we don't want to be called somebody who's a male chauvinist. But in fact, we're a male chauvinist if we do not share those wit-covered put-downs with women as equally as we do with men, because we're back in the mode of protecting women. And if women can't handle criticism, we're not helping prepare them to move forward, because anyone who's successful, the more successful you are, the more criticism you get. But we men don't know. You don't read in books anywhere about the positive value of teasing, the positive value of putting doing the wit down, the positive value of this type of banter. And so mothers genuinely think that when their father, when the fathers are, doing this banter with their sons, that they're being insensitive to the sons. Will the son, if the sons are well protected by mom, not well protected, but protected by moms, that boy will start to cry when the father does something like that.
Right.
And the mother
Right.
will, in her mind, say, he just doesn't get how to parent a child.
Right.
And she
Right.
genuinely thinks she is the better parent.
Yes.
And so when there's a divorce, that will lead to that type of her being able to justify inside of her mind why that dad should not be around the child as much as she
Yes.
as she is. And
Yes.
so we have to speak up, and we have to, before we speak up though, we have to learn what are the values of teasing, what are the values of roughhousing, what are the values of boundary enforcement, what's the difference between boundary enforcement and boundary setting. Women and moms and dads both set boundaries about equally, moms slightly more than dads, but dads enforce boundaries much more consistently. It's the enforcement of boundaries that require the child to have the postponed gratification that is the single most important ingredient to success. But we don't explain that in those terms to moms, and moms can't. So moms think that it's just us roughhousing until the child cries, as opposed to, as opposed to having some non-articulated, not even understood by the father, sense that there's a good outcome that comes from this.
Yes.
We have to learn to be able to articulate all the things, Paul, that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
And I do have to add, in all fairness, Janice is smarter than me.
Come on.
I was going to say, Janice, you better look out because you got things coming now.
Yeah, I know.
But it reminds me, when I do therapy over the years with couples, one of the things that was constant was that I'd literally have to teach the men how to ask for what they want. Because the men wouldn't ask for what they want in the relationship. They'd kind of think of what the wife wanted. They wouldn't say, well, I want it this way, or I want this, or I want that. So part of my job was to really help them, teach them how to ask for what they want. Because men are not trained to do that. It's incredible. It's just incredible.
Well, but they're trained to do the opposite.
Exactly, Paul.
Yeah,
exactly. Precisely.
And just on the point of teasing, I wanted to defend Tom and Paul to say that they do their share of teasing.
That's true.
Me.
That is correct.
Regarding men, or at least maybe we're working towards equality. But I was also going to say that in our society now, of course, a boss or a coworker who teases or constructively criticizes his female employee or colleague is very likely to be hit with a sexual harassment complaint or some form of gender harassment discipline. So it's become, this has become now the impossible to put in practice normal in which we pretend that we care about gender equality, but in which chivalry is actually enforced in the workplace in all sorts of bizarre ways, while women continue to insist that they're oppressed and not given the chance to succeed. I mean, it's just such a bundle of contradictions and incoherencies masquerading as equality that I'm not surprised we have a new White House counsel that uses the word equality to mean advancement for women and girls. It's what a tangle it is. And thank you, Warren, for working on it.
What is the net result of all that too is that you have men in the workplace who are more hesitant to hire women if they can get away with it, and who will not mentor women in the workplace. And I mean, this has already come out. This has already been demonstrated in studies that this backfires and harms women in the long run.
Indeed, that is the truth. And Warren, what can people do to help out with this?
Well, two things. I'll come into this, and then I want to get to some of the hopeful things and the constructive things that we can actually do. Just to reinforce what both Janice and Paul are saying. So, first of all, we have to confront the fact that HR is supposed to be called human resources, but it's not really HR anymore. It's HER. It's about her, and
that's it.
And the challenge with that is exactly what you're saying. I have talked to about 9 CEOs, including almost all of whom would categorize themselves as strongly advocates of women's issues and women's rights, most of whom have been mentors before. And we have to remember Cynthia Epstein's work on women who got the farthest in business found that even when there were women above the women who were starting out climbing the corporate ladder, women above those women who could be mentors, that it was much more likely to be the males who would mentor the women than other females above those women.
Huh.
And Cynthia Epstein was a feminist, and I sort of got this summary at a dinner with her and with Betty Friedan. So these were people who were very, into the feminist movement, and she was saying, "This is, we have to understand this." Now, of the 9 or so mentors that males that I've spoken to are CEOs, all of whom had been interested in mentoring women. Every single one of them has said exactly what Paul just said. I will no longer, and they weren't sort of like, I am hesitant now, but rather, I will no longer mentor a woman because I have a wife, I have children, and I could lose my career, I could lose my job, I could lose my reputation. And it's even if I help that woman advance, if I don't help her advance, and she does as quickly as she wants to, and she believes that that I was part of the problem, I could be in jeopardy.
Yep.
If I meet with her behind a closed door in my office, I start gossip. If I open that door and one sentence is overheard out of context, I could be the subject of gossip. If I take her out for dinner instead, and I pay for the meal, I have proof of the gossip as being out. If she starts crying about something that she's disappointed, and I reach over and hold her hand and move toward her, and somebody takes a picture of that, I am done.
Yep.
And so it is like the men who really care and want women to advance, which is the great majority of men, because capitalism is based on the ability of a company to hire the best people. When we discriminate, discrimination is a cost to a capitalist. If you hire less qualified people to be in your top positions, you're going to produce less excellent products, and for more money, and you will lose. You will pay a price for that, which is called going out of business. That's built into capitalism. And so, and yet no one is talking about those things at that level. And so it is completely destructive. And so I think, so one of the ways, but in terms of the good news, so example, Daniel Ellenberg is now the president of Section 51 of the American Psychological Association. The American Psychological Association, as we all know, in our group, came out with the most sexist, in my opinion, and all of our opinion, guidelines, basically calling masculinity toxic. Now, it was more complex, the guidelines were, as you got into them more deeply. However, the headlines that came out of it based on the introduction to the guidelines were clearly, we are basically advising psychologists to think of masculinity as toxic, and think of women as and the feminized approach to gender as being the ones that we want our psychologists to lead by. So we have, I have communicated extensively and had dinner many times with Daniel and his wife, and Robert Samery from our Coalition to Create a White House Council on Boys and Men has participated in their weekly or biweekly meetings. Mark Sherman has, and there has been movement. Daniel Ellenberg himself has been much more flexible and wanting to create conversations. Even though he's had some fears about that, he has begun to create conversations that are much more confrontive of this type of sexist males are toxic approach. And so, one of the reasons I was talking to Janice about, trying to form a group of academics who who make inroads is that, the beginnings of all these movements are involved with enormous amounts of frustration. When the Green movement in Europe started, it was always by third party candidates. They always lost. And now, if you don't have green advocacy for climate change in Europe, you cannot possibly win an election. And the whole tipping point phenomenon. This is the hard part. But unlike with climate change is not biologically built into our psyche as being wrong. But men expressing a desire to be really treated with equality does have a biological resistance. And so we have to work all the harder to begin to help to move this forward. And it does take a lot of courage, and it will take a lot of people who either have tenure in the academic community or who know that they have other options as a result of making doing good savings, or know that they can do other things in life besides being an academic.
In other words, it's a tough road.
Indeed, it is.
My personal experience pretty much bears that out.
There you go. Are we about there?
I think we are.
It's always astonishing when I tell people that the two of their boogeymen, Paul Elam and Tom Golden, are both therapists, and it stops them in their tracks.
No.
Yes, I'm sure you know this, right? But because it's sort of like the image of anyone who would talk positively about boys and men and fathers is that they must be some type of right-wing, person who is anti-female and a misogynist. And being a therapist that works with couples is like, and I do couples communication counseling all around the country as well. And so it makes it hard for them to sort of just take the next step in their condemnation. When they say that, and of course, talking about Janice as being, a female and a professor who's educated and thoughtful, et cetera. It's like it's a four-way stop sign for their automatic journey into we are all misogynists.
Indeed.
Well, speaking of misogyny, I want to remind everybody that the Regarding Men groups are very active. We have changed platforms after being booted from our payment processor. That's going smoothly. You can now find us, and there will be a link below on Subscribestar where you can join our groups. I'm happy to say did not miss a beat. They are going strong, and men are coming in there, connecting to each other, and finding out that, there are people and other men who actually do want to hear what's going on in their life and want to be supportive. And it's a beautiful thing to watch.
It is a beautiful thing to watch. I just feel honored to watch what's going on. Men really getting close to other men, in a masculine way, not in a feminine way, in a masculine way. It's great, man.
Yeah.
And by the way, a lot of this started because of our guest's work. Warren Farrell planted this for so much of this. And now, like I said, we've had over 200 men join Regarding Men. So if you have a feeling of gratitude about being a part of Regarding Men, your thanks should go to Warren in many ways.
Indeed. Amen to that. Thank you, Warren.
Indeed.
I bow in your general direction.
Thank you. And I also, I'm a sensitive person, as you all know, and I can't do this. I feel very lonely, caught between a rock and a hard place, and so the support of the three of you and others in the coalition is very psychologically important to me, because I'm not a loner easily. And,
Indeed, you are not.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
If someone is digging into the Boy Crisis book, and we all have limited time, I just want to especially encourage you to get to the part 4 on the importance of fathers,
Yeah.
and particularly what the differences are between dad and mom style parenting, so that you can explain with love and listening first to your wife and to the mother why your portion of parenting should be part of the checks and balances that both of you interact with and dialogue with, rather than assume the other one is wrong. And so, and that particularly to take a look at the family dinner night sections that run throughout the book, and how to conduct a family dinner night so that every person at the dinner table, every parent, every child feels heard and understood. And I noticed that I said parent as well. It's so important to listen to your children, but it's also important to socialize your children to listen to you. That mom and that we're all part of a team. It's an e pluribus unum phenomenon, one from many. One is the family, and the many are each individual at the table, including mom and dad, having perspectives that need to be heard, but not interrupting the children's perspectives or vice versa, to argue with them, but to be able to hear them out until the person who's talking says, yes, that is an undistorted, clearly accurate version of what I was trying to say. Thank you for hearing me. And I know that's the work that Tom and Paul, you do with your couples. And that's what every family needs to do, so that everybody in the family, no matter what their perspectives are, feels heard. And
Yes.
so I really encourage a deep dive into those 2 portions of the book in particular. And if you
Indeed.
want a quick summary of the 50 different developmental ways that boys in particular, but also mostly girls is almost equally are deprived of their developmental progress by when their dads are not involved. Just take a look at Appendix B, where all 50 of those ways are listed.
Wow, very nice.
There will be a link to get the book in
Yes,
the
indeed.
description. If you don't have it and you want to learn the real numbers, the real facts behind what's going on in the lives of boys in this society, couldn't think of a better place to start.
Agreed.
Absolutely agreed.
And for a lot of guys like listening better than reading, and so just pick up the Audible version if that's easier. If you're working out at home, or
Yes.
on
Yes.
your Peloton or whatever, it's just an easy way to get through it.
Indeed.
Put it on in your car, guys.
Yeah, man. If you go anyplace.
If you're going to play.
And with that, I want to say that men
Are.
Good.
Oh, God.
3 words you'd think we couldn't fuck it up.
Oh, well,
We
give us a
always do
chance.
find a way.
We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Warren.